G'day guys, Mackie with the Outer Circle, and today I want to talk about 6th Ed and what went wrong with 7th Ed. I was on Facebook earlier and we were having a bit of a laugh about how someone put up a picture of their army for 8th edition, and it's just 3 knights, 2 assassins, and an Inquisitor Greyfax. And I was having a laugh saying, oh wow, look at the narrative, look at this, how great this is, you know, how, I hated how we used to have those armies that, you know, were full of infantry and things like that. Oh, how shit was that, right? And it got me thinking, what went wrong? See, I got nothing actually against people taking armies like that. It can be done, you can play to the narrative. People sort of took me out of context on Facebook because they thought I was like saying, oh, no, you can't ever do it, dead set against it. No, look, there are situations where running 3 knights on their own or whatever is fine. There's whole knight lists out there. There's Forge World books on it. There's Games Workshop produced books on it. That's not the problem. The problem is not people taking 7 assassins and Guilliman as a legal army. No. That sort of thing is all down to the player mindset. And it's something that began with 7th edition, not 8th edition. 8th edition is not the culprit of terrible lists that break the game. Even 7th edition is not where terrible lists that break the game began. It's something that's been with us since the beginning of 40k. Things have been broken all the time because Games Workshop are not known for writing the tightest of rule sets. Fuck, they're in 8th edition 40k. They've had 8 attempts at it, still haven't got it right. Fantasy, same deal. Had 8 attempts at it, still didn't get it right. There's still a lot of wiggle room. Every edition has had powerhouses, whether it was vortex grenades on teleporting autarchs in 2nd edition, or Space Marines in 3rd edition, because they were fucking just such good all-rounders. Chaos Space Marines in 3.5 with either Alpha Legion or Iron Warriors that just fucking dominated the game because they had like 4 heavy support choices and 600 fucking obliterators and basilisks and crazy crap like that, and 10 bloody special rules on every single model in the army. It could be 5th edition where there's Grey Knights and Drago Wing that just, they 12 models on the table and you win most games. You know, like, but this thing has always been there. It's always been a problem with 40k. It was compounded, however, by 7th edition and has reached its like final evolution for the short term with 8th edition. What actually caused the problem? Well, I think the biggest thing was the Force Org chart. See, the Force Org chart, it didn't stop people making dickish lists. It sort of tempered it a little bit. Stopped them from going completely dicks out for Harambe, because it meant that they couldn't just take what they wanted from the get-go. They always had to pay at least the troops and HQ tax. I'm not saying it meant that their armies were balanced, I just mean that, you know, at least they had to pay a sort of penalty for the shit they were about to pull. It didn't always work, but it was something. With 7th edition, things changed, and I'll go into that. Well, I'll go into it right now. You see, the thing was, I looked at how I'd put together a video, because I got this idea for it talking on Facebook today, and I said, you know, I'd like to talk about formations again, because I haven't touched on it in a little while, and I talked about how they were broken, and, you know, think of all the things that went wrong with 7th, and let's look at what they were. Let's do a post-mortem of 7th edition. I thought I could do this nice slideshow with flashy intros and heaps of pictures, and no, I'm going to be really boring. Just put this picture up here, boring as it is, and I'm just going to talk. I've got a couple of dot points, and I will sort of compare them to each other. So let's start there. In 7th edition, all troops became scoring troops, or scoring units. Not only that, everything became scoring. Tanks, scoring. Monstrous creatures, scoring. Why? You see, the minute you made everything scoring, army list creation changed. Because instead of people saying, alright, I have to play for objectives in this game, I need to think smart when I create my list. I can't just go for an all-tank army, because an all-tank army couldn't and shouldn't be able to hold objectives everywhere. Well, with 7th edition, all of a sudden there was actually no restriction on that. People said, well, why not go for an all-tank army? Because they can now hold objectives. This is where we saw things like multiple Wraith Knights, multiple Wraith Lords, that kind of thing, holding objectives, creating the backbone of whole armies. People were taking Tau and they weren't taking Fire Warriors, something that should really be the core of any traditional Tau army. People were saying, well, they're not very competitive. I think I'll just go for the Riptide. And Games Workshop further enforced this, or reinforced this, with the way that they would market a lot of these models. They're like, you buy 2 squads of Fire Warriors, but you can buy 1 Riptide, takes up more points in the army, has some pretty impressive guns. It's like, there was no emphasis on doing something different. People just went for the easy option, and they were rewarded for that. This was something that was very much reinforced by the Force Org chart. Because again, that 2 troops and a HQ tax was gone. Instead, you now had Unbound. And not only that, you had detachments, and you had formations and Decurions and all that kind of, arse piss. And what it did was it really muddied the waters, because where the Force Org chart allowed you to have what they called a battle-forged army, where not only was everything scoring, but your troops could only have their objectives denied by another troop's choice. Now, that's all fine and well, and Unbound didn't have that. But the thing was, you could pretty much make an Unbound army out of a battle-forged army, because of the way the formations worked. Because of the introduction of formations, you allowed people to essentially circumvent the rules of the Force Org chart without any penalty for doing so. And in fact, there was often a benefit to doing so, because the way formations were structured was very much like pay-to-win DLC. I'm not saying that all formations were broken and over-the-top crazy strong. However, whenever a new formation got released, straight away the first thing you would see on sites like Bell of Lost Souls would be people getting on there and commenting, like, what is the strongest formation released with this book? Oh, this is the formation that everyone is going to build their army around. And constantly you would be seeing certain formations rock up in tournaments. They handled it all wrong. A formation should have been just a quick means to an end of building the core of an army. It should have been your 2 troops and 1 HQ tax, rolled up in a neat package so people didn't have to calculate it every time they built a list. Should have been like, hey, here's 2 troops in a HQ, here's a minor buff, here's how many points it costs. Bam. And it comes straight out of the box, and that's what you get in a start collecting bundle. It would have been that simple. Instead, the way it was done, it was basically, oh yeah, here's a whole bunch of extra special rules and extra shit and rules you can only get if you get this formation. Skyhammer is a great example of that, where not only did they give Devastators and Assault Troops Deep Strike in turn 1, but that they got things like being able to charge from the Deep Strike, fire at full ballistic skill, moving with heavy weapons, that kind of thing. And this is on a list that the only way to do this was just by taking this formation. And it's like, why does that formation get that, but those exact same units kitted out the exact same way in a normal list don't get that? Oh, because reasons. You see, Games Workshop normalised what we would consider to be dickish behaviour. Where in the past, people would rock up and say, oh, that person's got a whack list, that's a win-at-all-costs list that person has. And they go, oh, maybe I don't want to play them, maybe I want to avoid it. Games Workshop now reinforced that dickishness. People would rock up and say, well, yeah, he's got a bunch of Riptides, but, that's a legitimate list. He's got the detachment, he's got the formation, and, well, they're fair. They've got points values, they must be fair. That's the problem. They normalised this bad behaviour, and I think that's why 7th Ed had such a bad taste in so many people's mouths, and why 8th edition has taken off and resonated with so many people, when personally I think it's fucking shit, but some people really like it, and they're more than allowed to like it. I think this is part of why they do, because it took away some of that dickishness. Not all of it, but some of it. And it sort of washed away what 7th Ed did, because 7th Ed basically shit on all of the rules that had been built up prior to it. 6th edition was a pretty good endpoint for 3rd edition. And because that's what it was. It was an evolution of the 3rd edition rule set that had changed over time and over, 15, 16 years at least. And it sort of got FAQ'd numerous times, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, out of fat air, Games Workshop just threw 7th edition at us. Nobody really expected it when it dropped back in 2014, off the top of my head. In fact, it dropped so quickly that Forge World actually released a book like a week before, based around 6th edition. Just nobody expected 7th edition. Games Workshop just money grabbed, pulled it out of their ass, and bam, there it was. So they introduced this new edition. Basically all it did was it FAQ'd 6th edition, but it changed things that really didn't need changing, and it changed them for the worse. And one of those things was, of course, the Force Orc charts, which I've now covered. So moving away from that, the Psychic phase. I've covered it many times before, but when you created such an absurd Psychic phase, and believe me, 8th edition, Psychic phase is just as fucking bad for totally different reasons, but the 6th edition Psychic phase is pretty good. It needed some fine-tuning, needed a few spells that were overpowered, such as invisibility, changed. Sadly, when they brought out 7th edition, they didn't fix what was broken, instead they just broke it further. Because in a desperate attempt to be different, they made a Psychic phase that was just all about crazy shit, like generating warp charges, dispelling warp charges, adding charges together, having numerous buffs and debuffs to what you roll on your charge, and it just, oh boy, was it fucking complicated for what it needed to be. I've designed a fucking newer and better version of it, neither here nor there, but Games Workshop themselves has had better versions of the Psychic phase. There was nothing wrong with the old leadership test to cast a spell. It worked just fine. Probably could have used some tweaks, but they're the baby with the bathwater company. They just throw the baby out with the bathwater because they couldn't leave well enough alone. They just have to change shit for the sake of it. And when they see someone else have a good idea, they try and get in on it. But the problem is Games Workshop doesn't have a clue what that thing is doing right. So they try and copy it. Like, they'll see Forge World sculpt something, so they try and do their own version of it, and usually it's inferior. Or they saw Forge World introduce Lords of War into Horus Heresy. And Forge World really successfully integrated super heavy units into regular sized armies. But the way they did it was by having caveats. Like saying, oh, well, you can take a Reaver Titan, but it can't take up more than a quarter of your points. And you can't have a super heavy at all below 2,000 points. So straight away, if you want to field a 2,000 point Titan, you need an 8,000 point army. And now at 8,000 points, a Titan becomes a lot more manageable than it does in Games Workshop's world, where they introduce super heavies at any fucking points value. It just makes no sense. And all it took is that one little line, just nothing below 2,000 points, and that other little line, which was can't take up more than 25% of your points. Because there's always that one guy that hits 2,000 points and then spends his, most of his 2,000 points on that crazy super heavy, like a Warhound or something like that. And that's exactly what fucking happened. There were people going to tournaments at like 1,500 points, because I fucking went there and saw it myself firsthand. Their army was a Titan. Just a Titan as a fucking army. Why? That's not 40k. That's Apocalypse. And yes, anything can be justified. Maybe they were playing a narrative and there's a reason behind this Titan and he wrote this intricate backstory. Yeah, anything can be justified. I could fucking justify for you why North Korea should nuke North America. I should justify how North America should nuke North Korea. It doesn't mean that either fucking justification is right. Just because you can come up with some crazy bullshit to back it. Like, Jesus. Games Workshop just went off the deep end with it. And so you have this horrible sort of evil concoction of Lords of War, very, very loose force organization charts, formations, detachments, and it's all legal. And then it's further supplemented by things like this crazy maelstrom of war card system where, draw a bunch of random cards each turn and that's your objectives. And they just be terrible objectives. And they encouraged people to, again, move towards dickish lists. Why would you take a Marine army that was focused around tactical squads when the Eldar army across from you could move his jet bikes with scatter lasers fucking 36 inches a turn, claim an objective, then fuck off from it next turn when the objective changed? You're never going to win that battle. That Eldar player is always going to have a leg up on you because the rules were designed to encourage that shit. And that's why 7th Ed didn't resonate with people. It's also why 7th Ed does work for Horus Heresy, because Horus Heresy, Warhammer 30k, the Forge World version of the game, doesn't have that. It has a lot of caveats. It's very strict with the Force Org chart, and yes, people can abuse it. People can break it. People have always found ways to do these things. I'll give you a dozen lists off the top of my head that will break 7th Ed Horus Heresy. But they are the exception, not the rule. Because it's not encouraged with that rule set to do those dodgy things. Whereas it is encouraged with the Games Workshop's 7th edition rule set. Now, by the time you got to the end of 7th edition, people were just complaining. They forgot all the good things about 6th and 7th and how happy they were when 7th first came out, because Games Workshop just introduced so much additional shit throughout 7th edition in the sort of vein of formations and allied charts and Lords of War that just got so out of control, people lost track of what was good about the edition. Horus Heresy kept what was good about the edition. And 8th Ed was the mouthwash. Even though it's got a lot of the same problems, people just haven't really cottoned onto it yet. And believe me, they're there. A lot of the bad things about 7th are gone. And I know that sounds like a bit of a contradictory statement, but hear me out here. 8th edition has again normalised that behaviour of you can put anything you want in your list. But they've tried to use things like command points to encourage people to build their lists around more thematic choices. Do I think the command points work? Not necessarily, but that's for another day. But you know, it's probably a better rule set than late 7th edition 40k was. I'll give 8th edition that. Because frankly, 7th edition was fucked at the end for 40k. And it could have been really easily fixed. If Games Workshop didn't Age of Sigmar 40k, and let's call it what it is because that's exactly what it is. They Age of Sigmar the fuck out of 40k. It's the exact same game. If they didn't Age of Sigmar 40k, all they had to do was just put a few restrictions on the Lord of War, change the psychic phase, fuck off detachments, fuck off formations, fuck off Decurions, get rid of Unbound, and everything would have been fine. But because they didn't do that, they decided that rather than take a step back to something more similar to 6th, they decided to just fucking year zero the whole thing, basically, and they did a soft Sigmaring of 40k. And, you know, if you enjoy that, that's perfectly fine. I'm not here to shit on it, as much as it probably sounds like I am, but let's call it what it is. They looked at a system that they think is doing really well, whether it is or not, up to the individual, and they said, okay, let's replicate that because we think it's going to be easier just to Sigmarize 40k than it is to try and fix what we've fucked. And so, these people that couldn't be trusted to write rules blundered into another rule set. We'll see what happens with 8th edition over time. So far, it's a very mediocre edition. It's not great, it's not terrible, it's just mediocre. Anyway, I'm back with the Outer Circle. Sorry for droning on for 19 minutes. Please, thoughts and feedback below. One last thing. I have a video that I can upload that's just sort of sitting there on my desktop where I sort of shit on a couple of models from Games Workshop. I go back and I basically compare the different heroes of Chaos like Typhus, Khan, Araman, and Lucius, their models then and their models now. What I like and what I don't like. I don't know if I want to upload it because it is a bit of a bitchy video, even compared to this one, trust me. But if I get enough people saying yes, I want to see that in the comments, well, yeah, I'll chuck it up. Why not? If I don't, maybe I'll reference it at a later point. But yeah, it's interesting. I put a side by side together of, like, you know, multiple models of that same character over time, and I look at them and say, this is good, this is bad, this is good, this is bad, and yeah, there's a lot of bads in there. But anyway, if you want to see that, let me know. Otherwise, tell me what you think. Did 8th edition wash the bad taste of 7th ed out of your mouth? If so, why? Do you think that the faults with 7th edition were exclusive to 7th edition, or do you think that 6th edition was a bad edition? Do you think that 7th was fine? I don't know. I'm Mac with the Outer Circle. See you all next time.